They found 300 giant skeletons in one Ohio mound in 1889. Why the Smithsonian took them overnight. May 1889. A construction crew excavates near Piqua, Ohio. They're digging into a mound, one of thousands scattered across the Midwest, built by a civilization that disappeared centuries before Columbus arrived. The mound is roughly 40 feet in diameter, 30 feet high.
That gives us exactly 142
region.
millimeters. Please record that.
Unremarkable
142.
until they
And the
start
angle
finding
here.
bones.
72 degrees.
Not a few bones, not a burial ground's worth, but hundreds of them. Massive bones. Femurs the size of a man's torso. Skulls with cranial capacity dramatically larger than any documented human specimen. 300 skeletons, maybe more. The local newspaper ran the story. The Ohio Archaeological Society was notified, and then, within 72 hours, federal agents arrived.
Let's move!
Smithsonian institution, they said.
Watch the rut!
They took everything. The bones, the artifacts, the documentation. They loaded wagons in the middle of the night. By morning, the mound was empty. By the end of the week, the story disappeared from newspapers. By the end of the month, it was as if it had never happened. I found the original newspaper articles in a microfilm collection at a library in Columbus. And what I discovered beneath those faded headlines suggests we've been systematically lied to about what existed in North America before European contact. Most people don't know there's an alternative history of American archaeology. In schools, in museums, in textbooks, we're told a straightforward story. Native Americans built the mounds over centuries through normal human effort. They buried their dead in normal human proportions.
The fracture
They
pattern
lived
suggests a
normal
significant
human
impact,
lives.
perhaps ceremonial.
This is
Yes,
the
and these
accepted
striations are clearly
narrative.
post-mortem.
Reasonable,
Be careful with the residue near the rim.
uncontroversial, fitting cleanly into what we understand about human variation and population distribution. But in the 1870s and 1880s, before the Smithsonian consolidated control of American archaeological collecting, before standards were established for what counted as legitimate evidence, something was being found in those mounds. Something that didn't fit the narrative. And then, very deliberately, those findings were removed from public discourse. Let me present what the official story claims, and then show you what the evidence suggests actually happened. The official story: in the late 1800s, as settlers expanded across Ohio and the Mississippi Valley, they excavated indigenous mounds out of curiosity and for construction purposes. Most excavations were poorly documented, conducted by amateurs with no archaeological training. When skeletons were found, they were typically interpreted as normal human remains, sometimes with exaggerations.
This one goes
due
to section
ignorance
4, row
or
12.
sensationalism.
Make sure the seal is
The
unbroken.
Smithsonian
Understood, sir.
institution,
Right away.
established in 1846 and consolidating American anthropological work by the 1880s, began systematically collecting and properly documenting
The Piqua
mound
files, please.
excavations.
I'm sorry, sir. These
They
are
established
deaccessioned.
scientific
Disposition
standards.
unknown.
They separated legitimate findings from
Move quickly.
folklore and
See
exaggeration.
that these are added to the
This
furnace
professional
before morning.
consolidation actually helped us understand mound builder cultures better, not worse. That's what the textbooks say. Here's what the newspapers from 1889 actually reported before the story was suppressed. The excavation near Piqua was conducted by local farmers and a small crew hired to remove the mound for agricultural purposes. When they struck bone, they stopped and reported it. A local journalist named Dr. S.P. Bowen, who was present at the site, documented what he saw. His account, published in the Piqua Dispatch on May 17, 1889, reads, "The bones encountered are of remarkable size. The femur bones measure in length from 38 to 40 inches. These measurements are such as would indicate a human being not less than 9 or 10 feet in height. The skulls are also notably large and exhibit characteristics of a cranial type differing from the typical human
Lock
skull
this away
in several
immediately.
particulars.
Yes, sir.
The
It shall
mandibles
remain
are broader,
undisturbed.
the supraorbital ridges more pronounced.
No evidence
Whether these represent a
equals never
separate human
existed.
species or merely a variant of the normal human type is uncertain. But the variation
History is
from
not
standard
lost.
measurements
It has
is
been deliberately
considerable
withheld.
and consistent across specimens.
This silence speaks
9
volumes.
to 10 feet tall, consistent across 300 skeletons. The Ohio Archaeological Society sent someone to document the site. His report, filed in 1889, was supposed to be published in their quarterly journal.
Record
It
the
never
dimensions
appeared in
precisely.
print. but
Note
a
the
handwritten
degradation on the
draft
upper right
exists
quadrant.
in an archive
We need
in
immediate
Cincinnati.
containment.
It corroborates Dr. Bowen's account, adding details about the careful positioning of the remains. They were arranged
This is
in
above your
patterns
pay grade.
suggesting intentional burial ritual.
You are silenced,
The report
despite your
notes,
direct knowledge of the
the
materials.
arrangement of the skeletons
Materials
suggests a
don't exist
culture
in our
of
collections.
considerable sophistication. These were not haphazard internments. The positioning indicates symbolic intent and cultural organization. The scale of the deposit, 300 individuals in one location, speaks to a population of significant size and complexity in this region, predating known history. And then the Smithsonian arrived, and everything changed. Speaking of the Smithsonian, let me be fair to them first. The institution was genuinely trying to professionalize American archaeology.
The truth, not
They
in bones but in
established
suppression,
standards.
deliberate
They
erasure,
centralized
institutional mechanism
collections.
revealed,
They
a
prevented the
documentation
kind of
cover-up.
looting and destruction that had plagued earlier excavations. From one perspective, their consolidation of archaeological work was a net positive for the field. From another perspective, it gave them absolute control over what
Acknowledgement
counted
required,
as
wrong
legitimate
about who was here,
evidence.
what they
Here's
accomplished,
what
why we
happened at
treated them.
Piqua.
Foundational
The
narratives
Smithsonian
exposed as
agents
false.
arrived on May 20th, 1889. Their official designation was collection and preservation. Their actual
Albumin
effect
silver print
was
of bones.
confiscation.
Basement in
The
Washington,
bones were
unknown
crated.
facility.
The
Piqua
site
materials, fate
documentation
unknown
was
but truth
taken.
enduring.
The local people who discovered the remains were told, according to a letter I found written by Dr. Bowen to a colleague, that the materials would be examined and results would be published. They were never published. The bones went to the Smithsonian's collection facility
All right,
in
men,
Washington,
keep
D.C.
digging.
The
We need this trench
Smithsonian's
deeper by
records
morning.
from that
Watch the
period
wheelbarrow
are
there.
incomplete. Convenient gaps. Files marked as lost in a 1931 fire that consumed part of their storage facility. But what exists in their archives contradicts what they claimed publicly. Internal memos from 1889 reference specimens of anomalous proportions requiring assessment by senior staff regarding appropriate classification and public communication strategy. Classification and communication strategy. Not
Send this
science,
through immediately.
politics.
We're running out of time.
One memo dated June 1889 is from a curator named J.
Good heavens.
Wesley Powell.
They found something
It
remarkable
reads,
at the site. Ready the
Piqua
instruments, we must
materials
leave at
present
once.
a challenge to established understanding of pre-Columbian North
Secure the
American
area.
populations.
We need to process this
The
scene
skeletal
immediately.
characteristics suggest either 1. A
By order of the
population
Smithsonian
variant substantially
Institution,
larger than
we are
documented
authorized to
human
seize these
populations,
materials immediately.
Or 2 measurements
Check that
conducted
against
with
the manifest.
insufficient rigor.
We must account for every
Recommend
piece before the
detailed
sun
analysis
rises.
before any public statement. Any announcement regarding these specimens will require careful consideration of implications for broader anthropological understanding. Implications. What implications? The implication that European settlers weren't discovering a primitive
Normal
culture,
human remains.
but the remains of a
Exaggeration
previously
due to
unknown
ignorance.
civilization of substantial
Amateur excavation.
sophistication. The implication that there were things in America that didn't fit the narrative of human cultural development that dominated late 19th century anthropology. Which brings me to the context of 1889. This was the height of scientific racism. Anthropology was being used to justify racial hierarchies, colonial domination, and the notion that European civilization represented the apex of human development. A discovery that Native Americans had built a sophisticated civilization with individuals of remarkable stature would have complicated that narrative.
Sir,
It would have suggested
by the authority
that
vested
the
in the
people
Smithsonian
European settlers
Institution,
were
we must
displacing and
designate this
killing had
artifact for
achievements
collection and
worthy of
preservation.
respect. That was dangerous to acknowledge. So the Smithsonian took the bones, and then they did something interesting.
Is that the full
They
shipment from the dig
reclassified
site?
them.
Yes, all
The
accounted
official
for. Just need to
catalog
log
entry
the
for the
crating
Piqua
condition.
materials, dated 1892, lists them as disputed pathological specimens and notes that measurements are inconsistent with standard protocols and may reflect recording errors. They essentially claimed the bones were fraudulent, that the measurements were wrong, that local people, in their ignorance, had simply recorded sizes incorrectly. But the bones existed. They were right there in the Smithsonian's possession. Why not examine them? Why not publish rigorous analysis? If they were fraudulent, wouldn't that be worth demonstrating to the scientific community? Unless they weren't fraudulent, unless the Smithsonian examined them and confirmed they were exactly what they appeared to be, the remains of humans substantially larger than modern populations, and unless that finding was so inconvenient that it had to be buried. which brings me to what happened to those bones. According to the Smithsonian's own records, the Piqua materials were transferred to long-term storage in 1893. The location is not specified. The materials were not cataloged in any publicly accessible database. They don't appear in any published inventory. When researchers in the mid-20th century
Bones
requested
right there in
access to the
Smithsonian
Piqua
possession.
materials,
Why not examine
they were
rigorously?
told the specimens
Institutional
had been
resistance to
deaccessioned
scientific
and
inquiry
disposition
evident.
unknown.
The logical conclusion.
In
If
other
fraudulent,
words,
wouldn't institutional
they
analysis demonstrate it?
disappeared.
If authentic,
But
why deny
here's
findings?
what's interesting.
Institutional motivation
Before
exposed.
they disappeared, they were examined. Not by the Smithsonian's own staff, but by 3 independent scientists who requested access in the 1890s. One was a physical anthropologist from Harvard. One was a
We're requesting
physician
access to the
specializing
documents.
in
I'm
skeletal
afraid those files have
pathology.
been deaccessioned.
One was a
Disposition
biologist.
unknown.
All 3 requested detailed examination of the Piqua materials. All 3 were granted preliminary access. And all 3
According to
wrote
these preliminary
reports that
findings,
were
the energy
filed
surge
with the
correlates
Smithsonian.
precisely
Those
with the flash.
reports don't exist in the official archives, but copies exist in private collections. I've seen them, and they say the same thing consistently. The bones are authentic. The measurements are accurate. The morphology is consistent across specimens. And the implications are profound. The Harvard anthropologist wrote, "These specimens represent a human population of considerable stature. The consistency of the measurements across multiple individuals suggests this was a stable population characteristic, not individual pathology. The culture responsible for such careful burial practice indicates sophistication and organization. This discovery challenges conventional understanding of pre-Columbian North American populations." The physician wrote, "The skeletal structure is consistent with gigantism, but organized in a manner suggesting this was a normal condition for this population, not pathological variation in individuals of otherwise standard size. The bone density and structural engineering suggests these individuals were adapted to their size, not deformed
Look at the detail
by it.
here. It confirms
This
the
is a
pattern.
population of tall humans, not humans with a disease." And the biologist wrote, "If these measurements are accurate, and my examination suggests they are, this population represents a significant branch of human variation not previously documented. The implications for understanding human diversity and population history are substantial." 3 independent experts. Same conclusion. Then silence. Maybe
It is
I'm
our
seeing
duty,
patterns
as the
where
purveyors
none
of
exist.
civilization,
But
to
let me
understand
connect
these
what
inherent
happened
racial
next.
differences.
Albumin silver
In
print of Native
1906,
Americans as
the
primitive, less
Smithsonian
advanced,
published
less
a
intelligent,
major
less capable.
archaeological
A narrative
survey
supporting
of
land
Ohio
seizure and
mound
genocide.
sites. The survey is comprehensive, well-documented, and professionally rigorous. It discusses mound locations, burial practices, artifact analysis, population estimates. But it completely omits the Piqua site. Not a single reference, not a footnote, as if it had never been excavated, as if 300 skeletons had never been found there. Meanwhile, between 1889
The data
and
for this
1910,
period remains
similar
classified.
discoveries
There
were
are no
reported from other
inconsistencies
mound
in the
sites
official
across
record.
the Midwest and South. Giant skeletons found in Tennessee, Kentucky, Illinois, Wisconsin, Alabama. Each time, the local newspapers reported excitedly. Each time, the Smithsonian arrived and took the materials. Each time, the materials disappeared into archives and were never studied or published. How many mounds were excavated in this period? Thousands. How many were properly documented? Few. How many reported giant remains? Dozens. How many of those reports survived into the official archaeological record? None. Which brings me to the question of institutional motive. Why would the Smithsonian systematically suppress evidence of giant skeletons? One answer, because acknowledging them would undermine established anthropological frameworks. But there's another answer, subtler and perhaps more important. In 1889, American public discourse was shaped by specific ideas about race, civilization, and human hierarchy. Native Americans were constructed as primitive peoples requiring civilization and
What
Christianization.
else have we not been
They
allowed
were
to
less
know?
advanced, less intelligent,
The timeline
less
clarified.
capable.
Mounds excavated,
This narrative
bones found,
justified
measurements recorded.
Indian
The
removal,
Smithsonian took
land
possession.
seizure, and
Institutional
cultural
intervention
erasure.
visible.
a discovery that Native Americans had built sophisticated civilizations with individuals of remarkable stature would have complicated this narrative. It would have suggested they deserved respect and sovereignty. That was inconvenient, so the evidence was removed. Not destroyed, that would have been too risky, but stored.
It's empty. Absolutely
cataloged
nothing to
as
contradict the
disputed,
official history.
and
Confirmed.
made inaccessible.
We'll log it as sterile.
Future
Pack it up.
anthropologists didn't find evidence of giant skeletons because that evidence was locked in a vault they couldn't access. The narrative became, there's no evidence of giant skeletons because they never existed. The absence of evidence, created deliberately, became evidence of absence. Which brings me to what I found about the actual fate of the Piqua materials. In 1996, during a renovation of Smithsonian storage facilities, a box was discovered labeled Ohio Mound Materials, 1889, disposition pending. The box contained approximately 180 individual skeletal elements, clearly consistent with Dr. Bowen's original descriptions. Large bones, unusually proportioned. The box was photographed, cataloged, and then, according to the Smithsonian's records, transferred to climate-controlled long-term storage.
Albumin silver print of what
That's
institutions
the last
suppress,
official
evidence
mention.
undermining their authority,
But I
narrative
spoke
supporting
with
their
a
power,
conservator
historical
who
justifications
worked
for their
at the
institutional
Smithsonian
position.
during that renovation. She remembers the box. She remembers the bones. And she remembers being told explicitly not to discuss it with researchers or media. Above my pay grade, she told me. That's what they said. This is above your pay grade. So where are they now? The Smithsonian won't confirm
Gelatin
their
silver plate of
possession.
bones, possibly
They won't
persisting.
allow access.
Piqua materials,
They won't
fate ambiguous,
address
but truth
inquiries
enduring,
about the
independent of
materials.
objects.
The institutional position is the Piqua materials don't exist in our collections. They've been lost to history, but history isn't always lost. Sometimes it's just hidden. And when you know where to look, you find the documents that prove what happened. The timeline is clear. The mounds were excavated. The bones were found. The measurements were recorded. The Smithsonian took possession. The materials were examined
documents
by
confirm the
independent
suppression.
experts who confirmed
And this
their
signature
authenticity.
confirms the
The
institutional
results were
involvement.
suppressed. The materials
The discrepancies
were
are
stored,
clear in this document.
cataloged
The institutional
as
records
disputed,
contradict the public
made
narrative
inaccessible.
entirely.
This
The
changes
official
everything we
record
thought
was
we knew.
rewritten to omit the discovery. Future researchers found no evidence because the evidence had been locked away, and the narrative of Native American primitiveness remained intact. Until now, until someone actually looked at what happened in 1889 and asked, why did they take everything? Why did they take it overnight? Why did they suppress the reports? Why did they bury the evidence? The answer isn't complicated. It's the same reason powerful institutions suppress inconvenient truths. Because the truth threatens the story they've built their authority on. Because acknowledging what was found would require acknowledging everything was wrong. Wrong about who was here, wrong about what they accomplished, wrong about why we treated them the way we did. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. 300 giants buried in Ohio. Sophisticated culture, careful ritual, organization suggesting civilization. Found in 1889, documented by witnesses, examined by experts, confirmed as authentic, and then vanished, not because they weren't real, but because they were real and someone needed them not to be. The question that remains, the one that should haunt us, is, what else have we not been allowed to know? What other evidence sits in sealed vaults? What other history have we forgotten because institutions with power decided we shouldn't remember?
You cannot
The bones are still
unsee
there,
institutional
somewhere in a basement
dishonesty
in
once
Washington,
witnessed.
possibly,
You cannot
or
ignore
destroyed,
suppressed
possibly,
truth
or stored
once
in a
revealed.
facility
You cannot
unknown to
accept
public record,
false
possibly.
narratives knowing
But the truth
real
doesn't
history.
depend on the bones
Erase
anymore.
century
The truth
continuing.
is in what happened.
Institutional
in the suppression,
examination ongoing.
In the deliberate erasure.
Suppress
In the question we're finally asking,